Okay, gentlemen, so this is the fifth shiur on Hilchos Taruvos. So we're starting now Siman Kuf. Actually, Siman Kuf is a short Siman. It's got 4 sifim, and the plan is to finish that today. And it's, in a way, a beginning of a new sort of section within a section, Hilchos Taruvos. Taruvos is about when Isser gets mixed up with a Heter. So, in general, we know there's a din, a bittul b'shishim, and that's when we spoke about in the first 2 simonim, tzadik ches and tzadik tes, of different applications, when yeah, when not, all different permutations and variations on the theme when it's bottled, but bittul last week. And now we begin with Siman Kuf, things that are not bottled. So Siman Kuf, Kuf Aleph, and Kuf Beis, the next 3 simonim, are all about things which are not bottled. They're also b'mashahu. We have some other places. The emissaries we had already in Basa B'chalav, the end of Siman Pei Zayin, we had Davar HaMaimed Li-Bottle. Remember about Chalav Nimtza B'Keva, using the rennet from the stomach of the calf in order to make cheese. We said a Davar HaMaimed Li-Bottle. And we had also in Tzadik Ches, you had the Milsa David Lataima, something which is intended to give taste to it, things with a strong taste and so on. Is also, we have the Inyan Chazusa we mentioned, something which was put in to change the color, something like food coloring is much less than shishim normally, but it's nevertheless recognizable, and something which is made for appearance sake, chazusa, is also not bottled. But now we have these 3 simonim. We have 3 other inyanim that we're going to be speaking about. So, 1 second, please. Yeah, so I guess I'll give my introduction first. Yeah, okay, so here we have these 3 simonim of your Kuf, Kuf Aleph, and Kuf Beis from right to left. So the green little ant over there is Beria, and that's the subject of today's shiur. Beria is a creature. Sometimes people say Bria. I'm going to say Beria. It's a something which was created exactly the way Hashem made it. So this ant is in its original form, and a Beria lay bottle, feel a Aleph lay bottle. There's no bittul b'shishim on a Beria, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. Then we have in the next Siman Kuf Aleph, when you have something which is fit, it's an honorable food, it's a meichel chashuv, something that you could give for lifnei ha'orchim, in front of the guests. And then we have in Kuf Beis, a davar sheyesh l'matir, and something which will become permitted at a later time. So the classic case of that is Be'esh and Olda Yom Tov, an egg that was laid on Yom Tov. And that's the whole beginning of Masechta Beya. And that's really it's a famous sugya right over there at the beginning of Beya about the whole inyan of Davar Sheyishal Matirin, and many halachas we learn out from this din of an egg. Just to make it easy to remember, just by the way, so Beria is I don't really have a siman for that. But orchim begins with an aleph, so that's like kuf aleph. And then davar sheish matirim is beya. So kuf beis begins, you have over there a base. So that's just a way of remembering these 3 simonim. And we have later on in kuf yud. Kuf yud is a long siman, and speaks about many things, but among the inyanim mentioned over there, right at the beginning, is a davar shebeminyan, or davar choshev, something which is counted, that we know from all the sichas, parshas bamidbar, davar shebeminyan lebotl, something which is counted, never becomes bottled. And also balachayim, what's the difference in that and a davar choshev, that an entire animal, balachayim, are also not bottled. So these are all of the cases. So altogether, really have 8 different cases discussed over here. 3 were discussed before. One, like I said, in Hilchos Basar B'Cholav, two previously in Tzaddik Ches, and then we have over here, Beria is today's shir. The next shir, next week, if you look on your calendar, there's no shir next week because I'll be traveling. I'm not able to give a shir next week, so we'll be skipping next week. Then the week after that will be Kuf Aleph, and then the week after that we'll do Davar Sheish Matirin. And we'll see about these other two in Yanim, whether we learn it at the end. If we have some extra time, then we'll put them in earlier. So we have presently 11 participants. So I'm going to do right now is that first of all, I'm going to pause the recording. Okay. So now we're going back to the issue at hand, Siman Kuf. So, Minatayra, I have all discussion the very first time. The Siman over there is this, these Chumras Midiraisa Midarabban. So we know that Midiraisa we have, if it's Min B'Meinei, so we know, we learned from previously in Taruvos, that Achri Rabin Lahates, you go after majority, so Bittul Berev. If there's taste, then we have Shishim, or is it Tam Kicker, whatever the case is. So all of these chumras where there's no bittul berev, no bittul b'shishim, chachamim gozru she'enim b'teil mafilu be'elef. These are gezeiros mit the rabbanan that afilu be'elef lay bottle. So this is all, these dinim are all mit the rabbanan, but nevertheless, not always do we say sveika the rabbanan l'kula and in such a manner. The main marker for this, we know that we have certain things, like beria, which is the subject of today's siman. We know al pitera, normally you get malchus for eating a kazayis. Eat a kazayis, that's the shear for the general for isurim. But if it comes to a beria, so even if it's a small amount and it's less than a kazayis, nevertheless, if you ate the whole thing, nevertheless, it's you get malchus deraisa for eating it by itself. Now we're talking about taruvos now. This is when a beria got mixed into something else, but the beria by itself, then this is deraisa, even though it's less than a kazayis. We know I'll pitay it like that. You have a whole discussion, Gemara Makis, who wins the prize for getting the most set of malchus for one iser. And the winner is an insect. But in any case, when it's in a taruvos, so then the in your burial bottle is midrabban. So here we have, if you take the 5 different items that were on the previous screen, all the things, we have 5 different cases where there's no bittul b'shishim, no bittul berev, no bittul b'shishim. So we have beria, chedichar al iskabit, davar sheish matirin. These are the next 3 siman, and then we have the other 2 from Siman Kuf Yud, davar shavaminya balachaim. Davar sheish matirin is in a class by itself. So you see all these 4 over here, the beria from Kuf, chedichar al iskabit lifnei orchim Kuf Aleph, and davar shavaminya balachaim from Kuf Yud, and davar sheish matirin have big differences between them. Davar sheish matirin is Kuf Gimel. Kuf base, excuse me. Beitza. First of all, why is it that the Chachamim made such a iser? What's the siba? What's the reason behind it? So the reason behind it, we see the Torah gave a chshivas to these things. Torah gave a chshivas in the case of beria. People gave a chshivas to what? L'skabet lifnei orchim. But they have a certain chshivas that for that bottle. So Rashi explains, you can eat the same thing. You don't have to throw it in the garbage. Just wait a little, Bartzu, wait till Mitzvah Yom Tov, and then you're allowed to eat it. That's a davar sheish matirin. There'll be a heter. You're allowed to eat it lachar zman. You can eat it later on. So why should you eat it now? We're relying on bittul. We're relying on bittul b'chal zinya from b'diavad. So here you can eat it in a way l'chatchila davar sheish matirin and wait till afterwards. Just agav, those that hold that the reason chametz Pesach is not bottled, also by Mashu, is because the davar sheish matirin. Whole discussion is separately, but that's all the discussion of Hilchos Pesach. But we have, you could always wait after Pesach. It's you're allowed to eat chametz after Pesach. So that's a difference between them. We end up with a couple of other differences between them. First of all, what about in the case of Suffolk? So in the case of Suffolk, so we have a case that if it's a suffix, whether it has this chshivas, it's a suffix beria, it's a suffix with a chatichar al iskabetz, then it's a sveka derabban. And we say sveka derabban lakula, and if it already fell in, we say it's going to be bottle. If we don't have this stringency, If it's a suffix, whether it's asur or not, so then it's not bottle. We're going to come back to this. I'll give a case of this in a minute. I just want to give the overview first. So in the case of suffix, if the suffix in one of these dinim, so it's a sveka d'rabbanan l'kula. But a davar sheish matin, it doesn't help, because the same svara that says that you can wait till afterwards. So what does it help that it's a suffix? So we have another reason to be mavatal it, but you can eat it without being mavatal it. Just wait till after. There's a shas heter. There's a time you're going to be able to eat it. So you want to eat the egg now, so you can eat the egg for Meitzah Yom Tov. So therefore, this inyan of a suffix is not going to help for a davar sheyesh lam matirin. Let me just take a minute over here, the makom suffix over here. So just to explain, take it off over here for a minute. Let's say you have a suffix beria. You're not sure whether the thing was a beria or not a beria. So that's a suffix, that's a sveka d'rabbanan. But let's say you have you know for sure it's a beria, but you have a suffix whether it's asur or not. We have a case, you have over there insects. So I might as well tell you this din now. I told you once upon a time, but if you never learned Hilchos Teiloim before, it's a strange din, so it's hard to get it to stick in your head, but we're going to use it later today, so I might as well chazur over now. The din is that insects are not always asur. I'm not talking about tiny insects that are not visible to the naked eye. An insect which is not visible to the naked eye, you need magnification to see it. There's no isser on that whatsoever. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to breathe the air. There's all sorts of things flying around over there. They're not a eftame. They're not they're dvorim asurim. You look in the water under a microscope, you'll see all sorts of things swimming around over there. There's no isser for that because you look at the water, you don't see any insects swimming around. Certain places, if you live, you can see insects swimming around. You have all Hilchos and Tzemach Tzedek. It's frequently a problem. There's all tumult about New York water. We're not talking about that now, although it is negated to this din as well. But we have cases that clearly you can have a real live insect, literally, and you're allowed to eat it. You're allowed to drink it. If you remember, we had from Sim Pei Zayin, we talked about the Gevina Matulas, where you had the cheese with the worms on it. I showed you there the Ramah says, even though the worms are jumping around, that's when we spoke about it the first time, that then such worms are mutter. Why such bugs or worms? Why are they mutter? Because the only time it says in Pasuk, sheretz hasheretz al haaretz. So when you have a sheretz, which is sheretz al haaretz, so it's crawling on the ground, it's separated from wherever it was, whether it was in a cheese, or it was in meat, or it was in a fruit, or a vegetable, whatever it was. So when it starts crawling on the ground, so then it became asur. If it's still inside, so then it's mutter. Now, let's say you have a tree with fruit, and a strawberry bush, whatever it is. You have a tree, say an apple tree, you have a worm inside an apple. The worm is crawling around inside the apple. Let's say it didn't come out of the apple. Let's say it got in there microscopically. You have all sorts of insects that the eggs are only visible microscopically, and they deposit their egg inside, and then they grow inside. That's why a lot of times you find different sorts of fruits, especially in Eretz Yisrael, but in a warm climate, and you find the insect inside by the pit, mamish inside, and you look at the thing from the outside, and it looks like there's no pagam whatsoever on the fruit. But worms and apples, you see usually a hole, but you can have it inside. So if that worm formed when it was still attached to the tree, so then that's called sheretz al haaretz, because the tree is attached to the ground, and the fruit is attached to the tree, and the bug is crawling around in the fruit. The fruit is attached to the ground, so it's like it's sheretz al haaretz. But if the fruit fell off the tree, and now when the fruit was tolush, it's not attached to the tree anymore, it's just a fruit sitting there by itself. And at that point, the egg was still microscopic. And then it started to grow, so this insect was never sheretz al haaretz, because it's still inside the fruit. When is it going to be sheretz al haaretz? So then you have all the dinim in Hilchos Teiloim. If it peeks its head out and comes back inside, is that enough? Does it have to crawl around the outside? Does it have to mamish crawl on the ground? All different dinim when it's called sheretz al haaretz. But the nekuda is, just because you have a bug, You have an insect doesn't mean it's aser. It could be that it's mutter. We had like the cheese, as long as it's still in the cheese, and the Rama said, as long as it's still hopping on the surface of the cheese and it didn't hop off onto the plate, once it hops off on the plate, then it's iser. But if it's still over there attached to the cheese, the same thing. We have water that's in kalim, and if the insects formed when the water was in a keli, the only time that the insects in the water are prohibited, then it's b'mayim. Bayamim u'banacholim, the pasuk says, but if it's in a keli, it's mutter. So if it crawls out of the keli, then it becomes aser. So we have different cases where it's aser when it's mutter. Let's say raisins are a classic example. When the worm in raisins, basically they make raisins the same way today is. They made it in the days of the Taz, as they made it in the days of Chves Mitzrayim. They make the raisins the same way. You take them, you lay them on the sun dries them. Shame. Let's say you have a bug. So when did it become an insect? When it was attached to the tree, or when it was already tolush? So the Taz speaks over there a svek. Over there in his matter, even if it has bugs, you're allowed to eat those bugs on raisins. A mutter says the Taz, you have a svek. We're not learning svek now. It's a simon kufyut. The Samach Tzedek and Piskei Din brings down this din. He adds a third suffix, so there's 3 svekes on the raisins. But in any case, we could have a case where it's a suffix. So now let's go back to the case at hand. So we have a suffix iser. Let's say there's only one suffix. So then you have a sveka deraisa l'chumra. If you have a bug and you're not sure it was parish, it was not parish, so then we have a sveka deraisa. Sveka deraisa l'chumra. Suffix beria is okay. There's not a suffix beria. If it's a real beria, it's not a suffix beria. It's a real beria. It's a suffix iser. And it's a suffix iser mideraisa, and it's a sveka deraisa le'batul. Okay, if you have an insect that was aser, and it's less than shishim, and it's mixed up into what taruvos, and you had 2 bugs. One of them was missing a leg, and one of them was not missing a leg. Okay, and you're not sure which one fell in. Then that could all be a suffix. Let's say you have the bug itself. You're not sure whether it was a barrier or not a barrier. So in that case, suffix barrier is fake the rabbanon l'kuv. Then it's going to be both. Okay, but we don't have this union of being make with a suffix over sheish matirim. We'll get that later in Simon Kuf Beis, but just getting the overview now of the klolos the gedinim that apply across the board. This I'm not going to spend so much time on taruvos b'she'eina minei is applied b'minei and b'eina minei. So we also see that there'll be a difference because all of these dinim we're learning over here, there's no difference, but there'd be a difference over sheish matirim. We'll discuss it when we get there in Simon Kuf Beis. Okay, here we say minatayda mishach beri shleim b'chol gedel shechayiv malchus. That's an issa d'oraisa, and because biglalach shiva shenos latayda leberia, because the Teda gave a special strength to this issa, special importance to this beria. Chmir chachamim sheina b'tayla b'reiva b'shishim. So if there will also machmer that it's not bottle, because we see even if it's a very small amount, nevertheless it's no good. Now there is an opinion, interesting opinion. Yeshem the beri b'tayla 960 times. To put in simple terms, it says, "But the Rav Rishama Beri Afilu Ain't a Batel Afilu Be'elef." That's the Lashon Shulchan Aruch. Afilu Be'elef Leibatel. That's the way we paskin. Afilu Be'elef Leibatel. And there's Yerushalmi makes a cheshbon that those who want to say the Elef Yebatel, and the Elef doesn't have to be Elef, even if it's less than 1,000. It's only 960. Is also such a thing. So there are paskim that hold like that, but we don't paskin like that. There's an interesting letter from the it's actually hard on Tanya. We'll get to in a second. The Rebbe speaks about this, but that's the halacha psuk in Shulchan Aruch lefil be'elef leibatel. But nevertheless, it does show up from time to time among the poskim. If there are a number of different factors, different sfekas. There was a whole shaili on Chumasam Matzavik that there was a woman that she checked all the cabbage, and later on they found insects in the cabbage. So evidently she didn't check very well. And the cabbage was chopped up. So the shaila is obviously it's less than shishim, but does it have the problem of a berry or not? All true from the Tzemach Tzedek about it. Can we rely on her chopping? Not rely on her chopping? And there are different things. He ends up being machmer there, but whatever the case is, you have many tshuvas where you have borderline cases. And Actually, in the New York water, this is one of the factors that's mentioned. But again, we don't paskin like this at all. If you have anyway other reasons that it looks like it's lakula, so then you sort of add this on to the list sometimes. Now, this is only the berry itself. But tam hayetzem haberya batul b'shishim. If a berry fell into the food and then you pulled it out, that's going to be sif base today. So then the tam does not have the chshivas of a berry. So therefore, if it fell into a pot that was cooking, and that pot was hot, and it gave off taste into the pot, and you have 60 times more of the heter against the berya, then you have bittul b'shishim. The berya that Hashem created was not only the tam, it was the whole creature, the way it was. So therefore, the tam is yabatul b'shishim. The tam does not have the chshivas of a berya. Just 1 second. I just wanted to get this. This is really the right place for this. I put it at the end, I think. I have to go over here. In any case, it's today's Tanya Chita, so I have it here. I don't have it here. What happened to it? I had a whole slide, and it disappeared. No. In any case, there's in today's Tanya Chitas, we're learning Perek Yud. In Tanya, so in Tanya speaks about a tzaddik v'tevle, tzaddik v'rale. Yeah. Wait a second. So tzaddik v'tevle, so there's no ra whatsoever. And tzaddik v'rale, so there's ra, but it's already bottle. It's already bottle. What's pshat bottle? So just like you have bittul b'shishim, that you're not margish the tam, so too the tzaddik is not margish the taivas from Elamazah from Nefesh Abamis, because it's bottle. So how do you know he has it? Because there's still something left there, and you cannot be mahapich dara l'teiv like a tzaddik v'tevle if there's anything left. So even if it's bottle, but nevertheless it's still there. So the Alter Rebbe says tomorrow's chitas. Tonight is tomorrow already, yeah. That there are many different levels of a tzaddik she'ena gam b'binyan bitul b'miyute b'shishim al derech mashal b'elef or ravava k'yetza. So either you have bittul b'shishim, or you have bittul b'elef, or b'ravava. The Alter Rebbe mentioned. So Naharat Tanya. So the Rebbe gives explanation, and actually it turns up the Rebbe asked the shaila to his father. It's in the Igris, and L'kut Levi Yitzchak, and page Shin Sadik Hey. So over there, it's a long letter from the Rebbe Levik to the Rebbe. And he said, regarding your ha'ara about Tanya, what's Ravava? Where do we say bittul be'Ravava? So b'meila, bittul b'shishim, we know. Bittul be'elef talks about over here. But where did Ravava come from? So he says, look over there in the Zvachim, gives a maramakim in Zvachim, it talks about the 10,000. And then he explains that even though they're just like, they feel a be'elef lay bottle, so it's lay bottle. So what's pshat bottle be'elef? So the fact you have to be sheil it, shows that there's such a thing as bittul be'elef, such a thing as bittul ribui. Anyway, all the fascinating beer from the Rabbi Levi Kedarka B'Kedesh, why the Alter Rebbe picks these three, why Shishim is in one chalukah and 1,000 and 10,000 the other chalukah. So he explains that. He explains Al Pi Kabbalah, Al Pi Chassidus. Bittul B'Shishim is in Tiferes, and Elef is in Bina, Ribui is in Chachma. Anyway, interesting, but not exactly on target. So let's go back to the shiur on hand. Okay, we did this already. Now, Sif Aleph. Sif Aleph sets forth the main conditions of Beria. So Sif Beis talks about the tam, basically, and then Gimel Dal talk about what happens if a barrier fell into something. What can you do about it? Okay. There are 4 basic conditions that are spoken about in this in the Sif that are necessary, and you need all 4 of them in order to have a din barrier. All 4 to them. If you're missing any of them, then it's no longer a barrier. So I'm going to go through one at a time. So this is the overview of the 4, and we're going to go through one at a time. We have a separate slide for each one, so you don't have to, write notes and take it down over there. So I'm going to see. So the first is the Isser Shahoya by Chayes. This, the Shulchan Aruch says, is to be mamayit a piece of wheat. If you had a piece of wheat that grew in a kerem, grew in a vineyard, so it's kilayim, so it's aser, but it's not a living thing. It's from plant life, but it's talking about animal life over here. So it has to be iser shahoya b'chayis. Either it had when it was alive, even if the animal's dead, it's still something that had chayis. So that's condition number 1. Condition number 2. Iser sha'asa mitchilas briyase, that it was something that was aser from the time of its creation, like an insect. From the time the insect was an insect, it was iser. Let's say you have a eif tameh, an eagle. Eagle is a non-kosher species of bird, so that you have a little tiny eagle, it's a barrier. Baby eagle, smaller than a kazayas. That's a barrier. The Gemara talks about a eif tameh. So that's also mitchilas briyase. Let's have a eif that's a nevela. It's an avela that died by itself, so that's not also mitchilas briyase. It was still a kosher animal before, it's a kosher bird, whatever the case is. So that's not also mitchilas briyase. A shora niskal, not allowed to an ox. Again, Shulchan Aruch brings an example. We'll soon see inside the Shulchan Aruch later on that it killed somebody. It was done lemisa. You had to kill it. So even after you judge it, the lemisa, you're not allowed to have. It's also ba'anotek, and not only can you eat it, benefit from it, but that is not also mitchilas briyase. If you have a prohibition that once you cut it into pieces, it's not going to have the same name. So if you have like that example of a bird, you cut it in half, you don't have a bird anymore. You have a half a bird, 2 halves of a bird. You have a insect, you have an ant, and you cut off a piece, you don't have an ant anymore, you have a piece of an ant. Okay, if you have a piece of chaylev, so a piece of chaylev, the forbidden fat from an animal, so it has condition 1, came from an animal. Condition 2, it was always aser, because chaylev is always aser. But if you cut the piece of chaylev in half, what's each piece called? It's called chaylev, not called part of chaylev. The chaylev itself is a part, so it doesn't change its name. If you have something that would change its name when you cut it up, so it's no longer a barrier. And the 4th condition, davar shalom she'eino chaser, something which is complete and it's not missing anything. So once, as we said, this was the case we spoke about before about the mevatel listel lechatchila, and it's going to come up again today. They have insects, and the insects were put in a smoothie, for example. So before it was blended, you can't eat it because barrier lay bottle. But once it's blended, so then what happens? So then it's chaser. This barrier became bottle. Now, whether you're allowed to blend it or not, that we spoke about last week, about the problem of battles lachatchil and the Taruvos Shiur and a possible heter for that. But in any case, as far as the chumrah of a barrier, the reason whether you're allowed to do this is the question we dealt with last week. But the din, whether it has the chumrah of a barrier and it's not bottle, so as long as it's not the whole thing, so then it's no longer chaser. But we have details for each of these 4 conditions, and that's what we're going to go into now. So tonight, Brias Neshama, it has to be something with yesh b'chayis. So that includes over here, you have a bird. The Gemara brings an example of a bird. So if the bird fell in with got mixed up with a bunch of other birds, without the eif tameh, so it's something which has chayis, and it's not going to be bottle. That ant over there, it's a very small bird, a very big ant, or it's not the scale. But in any case, the wheat is not considered a barrier. The X over here means that the X means it's bottle. It means it's not a barrier. So even though now it doesn't have a neshama, it could be that the ant died, or the Gidda Nasha. The source of this whole discussion it's interesting how the Gemara picks cases which are always a little bit off, a little bit unique, because you can derive many, many dinim from one case. So the perek Gidanasha is before Kalabasa. Kalabasa, most of the dinim we had in Basa B'chalav were in that perek. The previous perek Gidanasha, we have many dinim of Taruvos over there, and it talks about Gidanasha being a barrier. So the Gidanasha is the sciatic nerve from an animal is no longer alive when it got mixed into the food. So to get the nasha, all of these things, even though it's no longer living, but once upon a time it was living, so that's davar sheish b'chayis. Now, the Mechaber brings an example of a beitza sheyesh b'yafreich, an egg that has a chick inside. So it's a very cute picture of a chick with a hat, part of the shell. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the egg has not been cracked, and somehow you know there's an nefreich inside. How do you know there's a nefreich inside? So the fact is today, we have all different ways when they're sorting the eggs and they're grading them, whether it's double A or single A, triple A, whatever it is. One of the things they look at many things. One of the things they look at are their blood spots. So there's screening for blood spots anyway. That doesn't mean that some of them don't sneak through. You still have to check the eggs for blood spots. But certainly they're going to catch an nefreich. Candling the eggs, they used to call it candling the eggs, and even the days of Chazal, you're going to hold the egg up to the sun, and if there's a chick inside, you'd be able to see that there's something happening inside. It doesn't look like a regular egg. So a beitza sheish b'yafreich is called something which has chayis to it. The egg itself has no chayis. Let's say you have a non-fertilized egg. A non-fertilized egg is not going anywhere. It was the safna me'ara, just came from the female chicken. There was no male around. So no chicken is going to hatch from that egg. So such a thing is ein b'chayis. But if it has nefreich inside, so the Mechaber paskins yesh b'chayis, that it does have chayis in it. Okay, we'll discuss this in a minute. But the Shach compares this with the egg with a blood spot in it. Now, egg with a blood spot in it, also we discussed earlier that again we're not learning Hilchos Beitzim, is also earlier in the some Peivav and Yeridei, right before Basa B'chalav. So the din is that a regular fertilized egg, today the regular eggs are not fertilized, but in the old days that the chickens had males and females running around. So the beginning of the chick is this tipas dam. So that tipas dam is the beginning of a chick. So this thing is also in a certain sense alive. It just hasn't grown as much as the Afreich on the right. The fact is the Afreich we're talking about doesn't look like that either. It's still in its early formative stages perhaps. But the shaila is, do we aser also when it has a drop of blood in it? So there's a whole shach that discusses this, and both of these cases, bemis are machlekes. So the Mechaber quotes only the case of the chick being inside. That is called a beria because it has chayis. And the be'er sheyesh that has a drop of blood in it, so it comes according to the shach. He learns that even the Beis Yosef doesn't hold like that. The Beis Yosef discusses it and he's masupik, but then he found later on the Bedek Abayis, the Beis Yosef wrote a later version, and in the Beis Yosef he writes over there that you don't have this din of beria that with an egg that had a blood spot inside. But there is a machlekes even about the Beis Yosef B'Afreich. The Shulchan Aruch says it's considered to be a beria, and the Pri Chodesh considers it. It says it's not considered to be a beria. Okay, why the Pri Chodesh says like that, we're not going to go into right now. We'll look at the Pri Chodesh inside, but I want to make sure we cover the basic din. There are those that say that the blood spot also has the din of a beria because it's the beginning of life. But the Shach brings a number of proofs over there. It's not considered to be a beria. And la halacha, we hold like the Shulchan Aruch that the Efreich that is considered to be a beria because it has chayas. And Paskin like the Shach that the one with the blood spot is not considered to have chayas and therefore it does not have the din of a beria. Any questions? No? So this is the first of the 4 conditions that you need in order to be a beria and the borderline cases we discussed. Second condition, also mitchilas briyasi. So you see both the cases on the right. We have our friends over there, the berias on the right over there, also were prohibited from the moment they came into being. Whereas a shara niskal, it was mutter until it did whatever it did. And also the nevela, later on it became a nevela later on, but before it used to be a kosher chicken. Now there's a whole discussion about why you shouldn't say it's asik, because it was Avram and Achai before. But Lamaisa, we hold that it's considered to be a heter, because the Isser Nevela only came later. There wasn't a Nevela from the time it was created. So this is, you switch from one Isser to another Isser in the middle, that it used to be Avram and Achai, and then it died, and now it's Nevela. Once it dies, it's not Avram and Achai anymore, it's dead. It's a Nevela. Okay, so we say, oh, okay, it's also Matchilas B'Riyosah. From the time it was created, it's always been Asr. Before it was Avram and Achai, and now it's a Nevela. So that we don't say. It has to be the same Isser Matchilas B'Riyosah, the same from the beginning to the end. Fine. So this is the din which I gave you the whole background before. When you have insects that are created that came from inside the fruit, so were they originally Asr, or were they not originally Asr? Okay, so let's differentiate now between I'll take this off the screen. I want to speak to you because you have to put on your thinking caps for this one. Because although it might seem very esoteric, but this is something which is widely discussed, and many people make a mistake about it in understanding it. And that's as follows. Remember now, if you had the raisin was growing, the grape was growing on the tree, on the grapevine, and an insect was crawling inside the grapes. What's the din? Asra mutter. Sheiretz ala aretz. Has to be sheiretz ala aretz.
If it was born in the grape, it should be fine.
It's inside the grape. Is that called sheiretz ala aretz? So in this case, the grape is still attached to the vine, and the vine is attached to the ground. So therefore, is it called sheiretz ala aretz?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's awesome. Let's say there was no bug inside, and then you cut the grapes off, and the clusters are sitting on the ground drying in the sun. And then the insect forms inside. So then is it asar or mutter? Then it's mutter. That's mutter. That's mutter. It's okay. It's mutter because now sheiretz al aretz. It first came into existence from inside the fruit. We're not talking about spontaneous generation now. Okay, leave it out. The Rambam says a person doesn't, but spontaneous generation is that the insect came into being without being born from something previous to it. So why it says in Gemara, the Rambam paskins, that you're allowed to kill lice, kinim, you're allowed to kill them on Shabbos, because they're not really called life, because they're not born from Zachar and Nekeva. The Rambam writes a whole Hilchos over there. There are people that say it's not scientific. He says the people that say it's not scientific don't begin to understand science. The Rambam writes very, very sharp. Well, today we know that these things. Anyway, we're not going into spontaneous generation now. The din is that this such a thing is mutter.
As soon as you cut off the grape, you can already assume any bug you find in there from that moment on is already mutter.
Oh, that's good. Now, how do we know? How do we know? It doesn't have an ID card or a QR code that we can scan it and say, I was born after I was cut. I was born before it was cut. How are we supposed to know? So it could be you're in the case of a suffix. Okay. So the question is, you want to say it's awesome at Chilas B'Riyosah. Okay, so we have a background issue over here, is that we have a Sveikat Yaraisa here. Okay, we have a Sveikat, but most fruit we're going to have a Sveikat Yaraisa because we're not sure whether we're sheiretz al aretz, not sheiretz al aretz. So you can't eat it. Okay, some cases we know for clear it was sheiretz al aretz. Okay, if you find it crawling on the outside in the package, you find. So clearly the sheiretz al aretz, not inside the fruit anymore. Okay, so normally you have a suffix. As I mentioned before, you have a sveka, you have another. You can have two svekas. I'm not going to go into that. We're not learning not Hilchos Teiloim, not Hilchos sveka. Okay, but you can have a doubt. Let's say you were sure that it came into being only after it was cut. What's the din? Mutter. How are you going to know? I'm not going to. Let's say you know. However you know. Now, the bug crawls outside. At that point, what? We say it's usr, right? Why? Because the shade it's halaretz. Let's say the grape did not have an insect inside. You cut it off the vine, and then the insect came into being. It's still inside the grape. It's not shade, it's halaretz, it's mutter. You can eat the grape without any worry, if you're sure. Fine. Now, this bug crawled outside of the grape and it took a spatzir, went for a walk on the surface of the grape. It'll make it easy. It went up the stem also, completely separated from the grape. Crawled back on top of the grape. What's the din? It's asr. It's asr. The shayla does it, you're not allowed to eat the bug. But the shayla is, does it have a din of a berry or not? Is this called Nesar Matchilas Briyasi? When it came into being, was this insect asr or mutter?
Mutter.
Huh? When it came into being, it was mutter. It was still inside. So it was still inside. So then it was mutter. I became asr afterwards. So who says that's a problem? One of the conditions, we just said, this is the second condition that we're in the middle of learning now, is that it has to be asr mitchilas briyasi. This is the taina of the Kreisio Plesi. This is a famous taina of the Kreisio Plesi. And this Kreisio Plesi is quoted in many places. That he didn't want to rely on this, but it was a limud chus at the Kreisio Plesi. So limud chus for all the people not careful about insects. Maybe we could say that it's not a barrier and it's bot b'shishim, because it wasn't Nesar Matchilas Briyasi. Why didn't he not want to rely on it? There's a lot of reasons he didn't want to rely on it, and for all these reasons, all the poskim disagree. Even the Kreisio Plesi himself says not to rely on it. He says this is maybe it can be a limud chus for people b'yem adin. You know, the Pri Chodesh writes in Hilchos Teilayim. Why is it we have so many surim? Person eats a kazayas chazer, gets one set of malchus. He eats a certain type of insect, gets 6 sets of malchus. It's so much worse than chazer. Pri Chodesh writes that it's a very, very strong yisr. He says, but part of it is that it's so difficult to check for. So the Torah made it more stringent to make sure people would check. It's very difficult to check. So when people don't check, it's a big tircha. So people don't check, so they end up eating all of these yisurim, and they come lamaila. So that's the Kreisio Plesi was matzel people. You look in the new the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the Manam Mekabes, and the Shalosh and Shuvas, in the end, the Shara Shmuas. The Shara Shmuas, how much can you rely on Shmuas is questionable anyway. But one of the things, Shara Shmuas, it brings down different Shmuas about the Alter Rebbe, heard from the Tzemach Tzedek, heard from the Alter Rebbe, heard from the. It's actually, but nobody heard from the. It's somebody heard from Hilchos Paritcher, who heard from the Tzemach Tzedek, who heard from the Alter Rebbe, who heard from the Maggid, that the Kreisio Plesi was really right. You can't rely on him, but the Betzim the taina is a taina. Others say it doesn't apply. You look over there in the Shara Shmuas. It's interesting because there are a few dinim of Kreisio Plesi. It's not clear which din he's talking about. He talks about Bittul with 960 also, the Kreisio Plesi. So when was the Kreisio Plesi? Which case was he talking about? It's not 100% clear. But in any case, there is such a svara. What's the problem with it? First of all, who says that it was mutter to begin with? We have to know for sure. Then it was mutter to begin with, and it was not Nesar Mitchilas Briyasi. That's one problem. And there's a bigger problem, which we're going to discuss right now. I don't know, bigger problem, but another problem. So Teilem Sheneitzin B'Peiros. So the Kreisio Plesi says it's not considered to be a barrier. Why? Because it has to be awesome at Chilas Briyasi. So since the insect, if it started from inside, here we have a picture of the worm coming outside the apple. So when it was still inside the apple before it came out, so then it was a heter. So it was not Nesam at Chilas Briyasi. That time is the Kreisio Plesi. The Torah Evan, this is all brought down Piskei Tshuva on the page. He says, yeah, considered to be a barrier. And there are many, many times. First of all, as Takir and Mitzias is, where are these worms coming from? Most of the cases, the worms are coming from the outside. That's why these apples, normally you don't find a whole apple on the outside with a worm on the inside. There's a hole on in the worm. So who says B'chlal it came from the inside? Who says it didn't come from the outside? We have no way of telling where it came from. And we have another problem, which is a more closed-like problem, which sort of knocks this whole heter completely off the map. And that's discussed in the case of a treifa mishas leda. What's the din? So we say like this. We say over here, nevela is not considered to be a barrier. Why is nevela not a barrier? It's a nevela's animal died by itself. So the animal that died by itself, so at one point it was mutter, it became also later on. So it's missing this second condition that it was not also from the time it was created. What about a treifa? So a treifa is the same thing. The thing was most likely born, okay, and somewhere along the line it became a treifa. It breathed polluted air and it got a hole in its lungs. Whatever happened to it, it became a treifa. But it was also not necessarily matchilas b'riyoseh. Let's say you have a chicken with extra legs. Here they got a chicken over here. This was a famous chicken with 4 legs. It was born in Eretz Yisrael. Gerade, they had in Marvet just recently. They had a chicken with 3 legs, and you don't look for treifas that are not common. You only look for treifas that are common. Whoever saw a chicken with more than 2 legs, but this chicken had more than 2 legs. They caught it. They hang up the chicken today by the legs. They say the case in Eretz Yisrael that they hung up the legs over there, and okay, I'm not going into all the cases of treifas. We're not learning Hilchos treifas now. In any case, this bird, from the time it came into being, was already treif. That's a treif mishas leda. Do we say that this is a barrier because also matchilas b'riyoseh? Yeah, the case in Eretz Yisrael, they had there was a different case. It wasn't it was Avram and Achai was the Isser. It wasn't the treifa. It was Avram and Achai. They forgot somebody missed this chicken. They didn't shecht it, and they hung it up on the line, and it just went through the machine. Okay, when it goes through the machine, it got drowned over there in the machine to take off the feathers probably, but eventually they cut off the legs. So this chicken might have still been alive when they cut off the legs. The legs, the Avram and Achai. Okay, and it got mixed in later on. And then the filabella leibot. Shame. What's a different din? The Avram and Achai, that's a issue that had to kept the same issue it had originally. Let's say it was a treifa mishas leda. It was always a treifa. So what's the din? So there is an opinion that says it's considered to be a barrier because from the moment this thing was created, it had these legs from the beginning, had extra legs. It's called the Yasser Kanotl Dami, and it's a treifa. But the Shach says, no, it's not a barrier. Why is it not a barrier? So it's an interesting svara. And if you don't get this, this is not like Mikra Adin over here, it's an interesting svara. The svara is, when it says that it is a matchilas b'riyoseh, it's talking that it's in the general class of an isser. Like an insect is an isser. A if tameh is an isser. All of these things are isser be'etzim. A treif is not an isser be'etzim. This particular one was a Yetzim min HaKlal, and it ended up being also matchilas b'riyoseh. The vart is not also matchilas b'riyoseh. That's what it says, but it's something which is more inclusive than that. We had before about Isser machmas atzmei as opposed to Isser belua. If you have something, a piece of nevela, if remember we differentiated when you're making rennet, making cheese out of rennet, so it was something that absorbed the Isser or something in itself was Isser. So if the skin was nevela, so then it's Isser machmas atzmei. The thing is mamash Isser. Says Al Derech say over here that the thing over here, the insect is a Isser, the Eif Tameh is a Isser. Okay, a bird is not a Isser. It happened to be this one became a treifa. Well, treifa is not also matchilas b'riyoseh. You found an exception. You've got for me a case where even the treifa was also matchilas b'riyoseh. No, that doesn't make it. That doesn't make it a treifa. Okay, so the maskana achreinim that it has to be a davar also machmas atzmai, not because of mikra davar study that made it, and that's consistent. With this thing that bachal insects are also the fact that you might have an insect that was yemot b'tchilas b'riyoseh. So that's why in general we don't pass them like a crazy place. It's a limud schus, but it's not more than a limud schus.
What if a certain kind of insect, the way that they are born is always from a fruit that's not connected?
So then it would be like a treif mishas leda. Anyway, I don't think there's such an insect, so it's a good question of Hilchos Teiloin. Okay, so we pass on like Torah Evan that is considered yet to be a barrier. It's a limud schus, but not more than that. And a treif mishas leda is not considered to be a beria. Okay, Tanai Shlishi. Something that if you cut it up, the name remains the same. So that's why if you cut an ant in half, you have a half ant. It's not called an ant anymore. If you take a piece of chaylev and you cut it in half, it's still called chaylev. There's a piece of chaylev, that's a piece of chaylev. That didn't change its name at all. There's a chaylev, that's chaylev. Didn't change its name at all. That's a third condition, and that's pretty much straightforward. Not much to talk about over there. Now the fourth, there is a lot to talk about. The only thing is the main discussion about it happens to be in Siman Kuf Aleph, because we have the same general discussion Lagabe Chticharol Iskabed in the next Siman. So the discussion of it is over there, but we'll just mention it briefly over here. It has to be something that is not chaser. The beria means the complete thing the way it was created. So you have here an ant is a whole ant, and the bird is a whole bird. This chick is a whole chick, or the egg is a whole egg that has a chick inside. And over here is the din of Gidder Nasha. So the mucker, this whole din in the Gemara is really Lagabe Gidder Nasha. And Gidder Nasha it's actually a strange case, because it's a strange case in many ways. And many times the Gemara does that. It takes a case which has so many exceptions to the rule that it doesn't tell you the rule and then give you the exceptions. It gives you the case which has all the exceptions. And when you think about the case of a Gidder Nasha, so it's the way Teira Shabbal Peh works. You recreate all the exceptions to the rule, and you end up knowing a whole bunch of dinim about the uniqueness of Gidder Nasha. Now, as far as this particular thing, the Davar Shalom Sheino Chaser, so this is a whole problem. How exactly do you define a Gidder Nasha? I'm going to show you soon a picture of a Gidder Nasha, and you see, where does the Gidder Nasha start? Where does it stop? You have a Gid Pnimi, you have a Gid Chitzon, you have different parts that are coming off, you have all different minhagim about what is aserd, what's not, midaraisa, midarabon. Very difficult to tell what exactly is the Geder of a Gidder Nasha. But if you have, however you define it, that is considered to be a beria. The Ramah is going to say on an ox, it's the 4 tfachim that's on the kaf. I'll show you a picture of what the kaf looks like. On the kaf haregel. In any case, so that piece of the Gidder Nasha, it's a whole long nerve. But that piece that's sitting on the kaf, those 4, 8 centimeters, the 4 boys, that is considered to be the real Gidder Nasha. And that part is considered to be a beria. Okay, and if you cut part of that off, then it's no longer a beria. Okay, but it's clear to see in the other in the other cases. So here it says, it doesn't have to be a chopped its head off. If you chopped off one of the legs, it's also not considered to be a beria. So the truth is there are poskim that disagree with that, but Be'ikar Adin, once it's missing a leg, so then it's already considered to be no longer a beria. The Prima Gadim brings down, if you have a fish, that's a beria, but it lost one of its fins. So he considers the fin to be a davar study that's not considered to be mamish part of the fish itself, and it's still going to have the din of a beria. So it's not always so pashut that just because a little piece fell off, I mean, certainly if the scales came off, it's still considered to be a fish. It's a davar chitzeni to the fish. He took the feathers off the chicken, so it's still a beria. But in general, we would consider that if a leg fell off, like I say, there are poskim that disagree, but in general, even a leg would be sufficient to make it no longer a davar shalom. And and even though it's a little bit, let's say, dissolved into the pot, okay, and it's also imrak tzas nimcha tzas bebishul. There's only a little piece of it, and it didn't completely dissolve in the bishul. It's only nimcha tzas bebishul nechshav leberia. We really need to leave this for next week. That's the whole discussion over here. Although you do have, and it's very geschmack, especially after the share. You look inside Piskei Dinim from the Tzemach Tzedek, we have Siman Kuf. We don't have that much in Piskei Dinim, but we have the entire Siman Kuf over here, and the Tzemach Tzedek goes through and explains. And one of the things which we'll speak about more, we'll mention it today, and we'll have it in Kuf Aleph. Let's say it became smashed. You have a smashed bug. So the bug no longer has its surah. It was smashed, but it still has all of its evarim. Not alive anymore. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's not alive. It could still be a berry. If you freeze a bug, it's still a berry. It's a frozen bug. It's very well preserved. And they've checked, by the way, all the legs remain on these bugs. cautious agencies have checked that because people thought of freezing different things as a way of being mad to them. But freezing them just makes them cold. It doesn't cause the avodim to fall off. In any case, but if it gets crushed, so then you have all machlekes aposkim over there. Lamaisa we're machmer, some tzedek's machmer. So then just a little bit is not to be a bariatim nisha shalom avul nifsed tzuros yesh lachmer. So it just doesn't have its surah, but that's like I said, that's a machlekes aposkim, and we are machmer in such a case. But we'll revisit this in Siman Kuf Aleph because it's going to compare the same thing, but Chtichar Skabed and Beria are treated together over there in that particular discussion. Okay, so now we have all 4 cases, and now we'll learn inside the Shulchan Aruch. Siman Kuf Sef Aleph, Beria. Again, to give some examples. Namala, an ant. Ayef Tameh, non-kosher species of bird. The Gidanosha, a limb from a live animal. A limb from a live animal, a piece of basar is not considered to be a beria, but a full aver, if it's an entire limb from the animal, then it's considered to be a beria. An egg that has inside of it a chick, or anything similar to these things, that even 1,000 times more, they're not bottled. And here you could jump in and say, but elephants, it's the feel belfly bottle. Then if it's 1,000 ones, bottle. So that's the discussion we had before. There is such an opinion. We don't pass them like that. A feel belfly bottle is just an expression to say it's not bottle. It's also b'mash. And now he goes through the 4 conditions that we just learned with what they come to exclude. Examples of all 4. And it does not have the din of a beria unless it's something which has life to it. It's from the animal kingdom. Lafuke, which comes to exclude chita achashal. If you have 1 grain of wheat of the iser, like hilayim or whatever the case is, so that is not considered davar sheish b'chayis. So if you had the 1 chita fell into the other ones, it's become bottle. We don't say it's a beria. For Cain, Sarach, and second condition, that it was prohibited from the moment it was created. And what does that come to exclude? La fuka eftar, shenisnabel, a kosher bird that became an avela, either was not shechted properly or died by itself. V'sheraniskal, the axe that was condemned to be executed. So there used to be a kosher ox, and now it became prohibited. So that was not prohibited from the moment it was created. And then, so this over here is condition 3, number 4 together. So the Nesa Kalim point out there's 2 separate things. It has to be something which is complete. That if you would cut it, you would divide it, that no longer has its name, lafuka chelef. That chelef, if you cut into pieces, it still has its name, which is not the case. All the cases above, ant is going to be half an ant, the bird is going to be half a bird, the gidanosha is going to be a piece of the gidanosha, every menachai is going to become basa menachai, and so on. And the 4th condition, sheish sholem. The 4th condition is that it has to be complete, which excludes the case where, for some reason, a piece of it got knocked off. And now we have over here the Ramah talks about Gidanosha. So, just in general, we have prohibition of the Torah Chayla, we have prohibition of Dam. So we get the blood out of the animal through salting, but there's also Gidei Dam. There's veins, arteries that you have to take out, or at least you have to cut them so the blood drains out. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem. You're going to be eating blood from the animal. So too, we have a din of nikur. You have to take off forbidden fats and certain other things you have to take out, like the gidanosha. So in general, the animal is divided in half. We have the chelik achrayim, the chelik pnim, the front of the animal, and the rear, the hind quarter of the animal. And in general, we do not eat at all the hind quarter of the animal because it's too difficult to do nikur on. There is a kares for eating even a tiny bit of chelev, kazayis kemalkos, but even mashu is also aser. And which you have a shear, it's a kares. So in general, there are places where they have they do nikkur chelik achraim, but in general they don't, and therefore we're not so experienced with Yid Anasha. But you understand, based on Mikdash, you're not allowed to just get rid of the meat because you don't know how to do nikkur. You have to do the nikkur, and you have to get rid of the Yid Anasha and so on and so forth. All the dinim, have all Perek and Gemara Yid Anasha, and you can see if somebody, a menaker, took out the Yid Anasha, you can see it's obvious on the way it's cut up that somebody took out the Yid Anasha. The question is, as far as the din of beria, so what happens? The menaker takes a knife and he takes the meat and he takes out. Today, a menaker does the same thing. So we don't do the Yid Anasha, we do the chelik pnim. There's also different things you got to cut out, veins and nerves and different things you cut out over there. Things that are close to chaylev. In any case, so what does he do? So he takes the fat and he throws it away. Then he takes the Yid Anasha and he cuts it out and he throws it away. Now, let's say it fell into something. So that Yid Anasha is called a beria. That's the makar in the Gemara for the din of beria. Yid Anasha. The shaila is how much of this Yid Anasha? It's very long. The Yid Anasha, it has to be the whole Yid Anasha. What's considered to be a beria? If it's a bird, it's got to be the whole thing. Even ant has to be the whole thing. This Yid Anasha is quite long, and it splinters off as a nerve. It splinters off into smaller and smaller areas. So which part is considered to be a beria? So the Rama says as follows: Ve'eker Yid Anasha eina ela al hakaf bilvad. It's only on the kaf hayorich. It's only the hind quarter and only on the kaf, which is the curved piece of meat. Soon see a picture. Fukarech of dalet its boys. And that is, it has the width of, you take the width of 4 fingers, each finger is 2 centimeters to 8 centimeters long. And if that entire length of 4 fingers of 8 centimeters is complete, then it's called a beria. Taz brings down that if it's a large sheep, then it's not 4 etzbois, it's 2 etzbois. And if it's a smaller one, it could be less than 1 etzbois. So you're talking about now the Yid Anasha to be a beria, it's less than a width of a finger on a small animal, like the sheep that they're shechting today. They're small. Sheep, goats, these small animals. To be a beria, the whole Yid Anasha is very, very small. So it's a big problem if you're doing it. So here he has a picture. This Ramah. So here you have a picture of the Yid Anasha, the sciatic nerve, you call it in English. Here it's coming down over here, and it's coming down over here. Then it splits. So you have here the Yid Apnimi, the Yid Achitzon, and it just keeps splitting. You see all of these little offshoots over here. Staifus Yid Anasha. So this one, the one split into 2, and then it split into another 2, and down over here it's also splitting over here and over here. These are called knekne. So all different sorts of names for the different parts over here. This is once again this thing. Okay, so all of this, so exactly which part is considered to be the place where it's usher. So here he brings down over here from the Taz at the smaller shiurim. So here you have a picture of the animal itself. So here you see the Yid Anasha. He's pulling over here, and here's the Yid Pnimi, and this is the Shuman Shel Gid. So the Shuman Shel Gid is very very important. We're going to have it in Sif base, because the shuman, the fat, which is around the Yid Anasha, is asim d'Rabban, and it has tam. Now Yid Anasha, it has a whole discussion in the Gemara. I'll come back to whether Yidim have tam or not. We'll come back to that in a second. But the Shuman definitely has tam, and that's an Issa d'Rabbanan. We're going to speak about that in Siv base. So, Minatera, the Issa is only the Yid Apnimi, not the Yid Achitzon. The Chachamim also regamas the Yid Achitzon. Even Nogel Lesser Shuman Shesov Yid Anasha. And the minig is to not eat the Shuman either, even though it's clearly not Yid Anasha. You can tell this is a Yid. You know, this is part of nerve. This is a nerve, and the Shuman is only fat. So clearly, it's not the Yid, but the minig is not to eat it. So it seems it's even less than a Issa d'Rabbanan Mamish, Yisrael Kadeshim Haim. That's going to be relevant later on, L'Halacha. Just show you, I have another picture over here, so I don't know how easy it's going to be. this show and tell over here, but this picture doesn't add too much, but this one I think does add. So let me take this off share. Let's see if I can show you this in a way that it does you some good. You see over here, this round piece of meat over here is the kaf. And you see it's rounded like a spoon. So the part of the Gid Anosha that's over there, that's connected, this kaf, that's the length that is prohibited. Here you can see on the bottom. So here you can see it's written Kafa Yorech. I don't know if you can read that. See, it says over there Kafa Yorech. I don't know if you can read it, but this piece of meat over there is a Kafa Yorech. So what he's holding in his hand, with the glove on, so that's the Gid Anosha, which is on top of the Kafa Yorech. And here's just another picture of the same thing. So the Gid runs all along here, but the part that's going to be the barrier is the part that's over here. And the rest of it, so you have all of this Gid Anosha here. You see another picture. It's the same thing you had before, just in a different color. You see the green. The green is the Gid Anosha, and you see how it splits and splits and splits, and we have different minhagim and how much of that is asset. But as far as the dinner barrier concerned, that's not really relevant. Okay, I think we should take a break. I'm gonna finish with the we'll finish with the Gid Anosha after a break. We'll take a 10-minute break. It's 8:25, so we'll come back 8:35 minutes. Okay, so let us get back to the subject at hand. So before going back to the PowerPoint, let's speak a bit about the Gid Anosha. So that's the prime case. So in order to compare it to all the more common cases, we need to understand what are the limitations of this din. So there's a machlekes in the Gemara about Gid Anosha. Does it have taste or not? Yesh begidim b'neisen tam or ein begidim b'neisen tam. That's the Gid Anosha itself. The fat around the Gid Anosha for sure has tam, but that's only in Issa D'Rabbanan. The Issa D'Oraisa of the Gid Anosha itself, we paskin that it does not have taste. Not have taste. For that matter, what's with the taste of an ant? I mean, people not really eating ant soup. They say the environmentalists are trying to get everybody to give up meat and for insects, grasshoppers, whatever the case is, chveis ants, all different worms for a source of protein. How good for the environment it is, I can't tell you, but whatever the case is, that what's the time of such a thing? So the nachrim, they're going to eat this, they're going to have to put some artificial flavor in it or something like that. Can I mute? Yeah, sure, I can mute everybody. Mute. Mute all. Consider yourself be muted. Okay. Sorry. Just get here. Where was I? Oh, I was not sure. Talking about Gid Anosha. So we're saying because begidim b'neisen tam, it doesn't have taste. What about an ant? The ant, yeah, has taste. The ant has a taste. It's the most. It's disgusting. So if an ant falls into something and you pull it out, do we have to worry about the tam or not? So we know neisen tam levgam, but the ever doesn't answer anything. That was a whole we learned over back in Santa Gimel and Bos V'cholav leave some gain ben yeme. It's neisen tam levgam. So if something which is sitting 24 hours, neisen tam levgam, what's with an ant? What's with an insect? L'choret, yeah, neisen tam levgam. Why b'chal should it be yasser? If a person takes a piece of meat and it became rotten, moldy, nifsal mechilas kelev and eats it, is doing isser? It's disgusting. It's not. There's no isser. I mean, So, achshave, there's different reasons you shouldn't eat it, but as far as the iser itself, it became you have a piece of chazer, and the whole thing's spoiled, and it's not even edible. So when the person eats it, he's, I guess, the iser of eating chazer. It's not the it's nice and tam gam. So why should bugs be aser? So the answer is because Hashem said so. Again, to know the Torah says that bugs are aser. They don't have a good time. They don't have a good time. It's aser anyway. You're not allowed to eat it. Can't eat. What's with Gidanosha? It's all derech of the Gidanosha. The Gidanosha also doesn't have any time. We paskin like that. So Rambam says we discussed once before how could be a machlekes and a metzias. So the paskin do bring down the shtickle tam hotas. Yeah, a tiny little bit of time. The shaila, it's a machlekes whether that little bit of taste that it has, does the Torah consider that to be yet tam or not? So we say ain begidim b'neisen tam. We paskin that it's not neisen tam. Finished. That little bit is not considered a bichosh. So that's the psak. So now the question is going to be what's with the taruvos? What's going to be with the taruvos of the gidanosha? It got mixed into something, so you're not allowed to eat a gidanosha. Now you mix it into taruvos, and we say it's beria, so it's not bottle. So the shayla is going to be in siv base. Let's say you have only the tam inside, and you don't have the thing itself. Do we have to worry about the tam? So that's what we know. Gidamen neisnim tam. Maspik leitzema taruva. So it's going to be good enough to take it out of the mixture. The problem is eating the gidanosh itself. But since we paskin ain begidim b'neisen tam, as long as you don't eat the gid, even if it was cooked in the pot, but nevertheless, does it have the power to aser the pot? Does it not have the power to aser the pot? So if it's no longer there, the shuman agid shnogel aser neisen tam. Okay, so the shuman agid is neisen tam. So you're going to need shishim against the shuman of the gid, but you don't need shishim against the gid. As long as you take it out and you're not eating it. So first, the shuman agid is not a barrier. The gid has a problem of barrier. The shuman has a problem of tam. So if the gidanosh is still there, so it's not going to be bottle, it's a barrier. If the shuman is there and the gid is not there, then you need shishim against the shuman. So that's the general outline, which leads us to the next sif. So the yarchem gidanosh shnofel tech tafshel heter. So here, this is either a very small yarech or a very big pot, but the whole yarech fit inside. And b'chal, there's a whole debate that this whole din we're talking about in sif base, that we say that the gidanosha fell into a pot. When the gidanosha fell into the pot, was it because they didn't do nikur on this leg? This yarech over here, al kafa yorech, it says. So this kafa yorech, when it fell inside, did they not do nikur on it? So the whole gidanosha with the fat inside. Is that what happened? Or they did the nikur on it and they took out the gidanosha, and there was a whole bunch of fat and all the stuff over there that is sitting on the side, and then it got all thrown into the pot together. There's going to be a big nafka min ledin over here, but let's first see the din. So the yarechim gidanosha shnofel tech tafshel heter. But the picture they have over here, you see there's the gidanosha, the pnimi, the chitz, and all the different parts of the gidin over here, and it fell inside. Let's say you took out the gidanosha from the tafshel. Let's say there's a whole bunch of different pieces of meat there, whole different parts of the animal. They shechted up a sheep, a small sheep with a big pot, and they cut it into pieces, and they did malicha on it, and they forgot to take out the gidanosha, and they threw the whole thing into the pot. And the whole thing cooked together. So it's got the gidanosha inside. The gidanosha is not bottle. So you can't eat this whole mixture unless you can figure out what's the gidanosha. That's why it makes more sense in a certain way to say that when you're talking about it, the case it's that it was already taken out, because otherwise you can just take a look right away at the leg and you'll see whether the gidanosha was taken out or not. You can look at it and you can see whether it was cut out or was not cut out. But let's say it was a bunch of gidnim put in over there, so a bunch of these pieces of tissue, nerve tissue, whatever it is, some of it is mutter and some of it is aser and some of it is a gidanosha, which is a berry, which is not bottle. And just by looking at it, you can't really tell. So let's say you took anything that looked like a gidanosha, the whole thing cooked together, and you have a whole bunch of soup over there and a feel of aleph like bottles, so you can't eat the soup. So what can you do? Take out anything that looks like a gidanosha. So then can you eat the soup? So mitzi was gidanosha matavshil. Tzorich shishim keneged hashumen bilvad. Vakol mutter. You don't need shishim against the gid anosha. Why do you not need shishim against the gid anosha? Because ain't begid b'neis and tam. It doesn't have any taste anyway. Shishim is when you're talking about an initial tam, you need shishim. The shuman has tam, so you need shishim against the shuman. Okay, but you don't need shishim against the gid anosha. It doesn't have tam. If it's still there, then a filabella bottle. If you took it out, then you don't even need shishim. Even when we say tam ke'eker, but that's something that has tam. This doesn't have tam. I'm not sure it's in the slides over here because it's really later on. It's in Simon Kuf Dalet and Kuf Zayin. Talks about what does the same thing apply to an insect. La halacha, we don't say the same thing about an insect. It doesn't say that the insects are not nes and tam. So the Lamaisa, the Shachrites and Tzemach Tzedek also brings down, unless it's Hefsa Meruba, even if you took out the insect, you have the famous case to the Alter Rebbe about the fly that fell into the soup. And the Taz says over there about taking out the fly with a little bit of soup in the spoon. So all shilas are better or not. But the Taz wants to say, since it's taking soup from soup, so you have a spoonful of soup and there's a fly inside. So it's not called pseilus miteichechol. It's not better. It's taking soup from soup. It's taking eichel miteichechol. And the Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur that the chash chatas, because that whole spoon of soup is considered to be pseilus. You have one little spoonful of soup and there's a fly inside. Who wants to eat such soup? Now, if it was hot, and especially if it was a klirishon, so now the question becomes, what's with the spoon? Mainly, you're not going to eat the soup, because who wants to eat soup that became a swimming pool for a bug, a little bit over there. But then the shaila becomes, maybe the spoon becomes aster at that point. You certainly don't have shishim in the soup against the bug. So maybe it was not a klirishon, klisheni. It's a whole different thing. Anyway, that's in Kuf Dal, Kuf Zayin. He's going to talk about that, but Lachatchila was certainly a machmer. Have some merubi can be made. But over here by the gid, the Torah says beferish, and we get them b'neisim tam. The Gemara says beferish. That's the din. So you don't need shishim against the gid. Now, what happens now? The plot thickens. The soup also thickens. Let's say that the gid anosha dissolved inside the tamshel. Now, to me, it doesn't look like it's such an easy job that this gid anosha is really going anywhere very fast. You're going to cook it so much that it dissolves. It looks like it's not going to dissolve ever. But let's take a case. Somebody took it and they didn't know better, and they decided they're going to make. Sometimes they take the soup and they have these soup blenders, and you make the whole thing into one mush. Somebody told me the word zhuzh. You zhuzh the soup. You take us when the soup makers, and you make the whole thing into one unit. The whole thing everything becomes dissolved. So let's say somebody did that, and you say, did anybody see the gid anosha? When I did the nikra over there, I left it right over here on the counter. So, on the counter right next to the towel? Yeah. Oh, I threw it inside. I thought it was mutter. Okay, and now it's already in the tafshel. So now what's the din? So we learned before that once you cut up a beria, it loses its chshivas of beria. Okay, so we don't say it's a filabella flay bottle, because the fact that it was, if it was done on purpose and we had a problem of mavatal lis al-chatchila, and that you just answered the questions on that. What's the din? Shegeg, amazing, banim, deraisa, so on. But let's say it was done by shegeg, whatever the case is, we now want to know what's the din b'di'evet now. What's the din b'di'evet with this thing? Is it bottle or not bottle? Or they didn't find out about it, whatever the case was, it was nimcha. So, do we need shishim or not? The Torah says it's an iser gid anosha, but on the other hand, it doesn't have any tam. The gid anosha is not left anymore. I mean, the gid anosha is there, but the whole thing has been dissolved. So it's not in existence anymore as a gid anosha. Do we need any bittul b'shishim? So Rapsak din tzorach shishim. Gam keneged a gid that's me shishim against the gid. Why? Because the Torah answered it. The Torah answered it's finished. They're not going to get away without shishim. When you think about it for a moment, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, really. Why? What's in your shishim? Why do you need shishim? Iser is bottle berev. Why need shishim? Because the tam kicker. But it doesn't have any time. Let's say according to Machaber. Machaber says you should give it to an achri to taste. You don't just talk about shishim. Go at shishim when it's impossible to figure out the taste, the min b'minei, something like this. But normally you have the nachri is going to taste it, and he's going to say, does he taste the yisr? So you give it to him, you say, you taste the gid anashe? He says, gid anashe, gid doesn't have any taste. How am I supposed to taste it? And he tastes some of the soup. He says, I don't taste the gid anashe. Because Bachal, I don't know what gid anashe tastes like. And the reason he doesn't know what gid anashe tastes like is because they ain't begid them nice and tam. They don't have any taste. So he can't taste it. So how does shishim fly in over here? So you could say that in the cases where you can't be Mashayir according to the times, even the Machaber says you should judge shishim. We have no choice. But over here, does it really make shishim? Does it make sense shishim? Does not make sense shishim. What's the story? So the Taz brings down this question. And it brings down the Rashba. And the Rashba doesn't really see why this not should be bottle berev. The Rashba doesn't really see why you should need shishim. And the Taz is not ready to be Meko like the Rashba, although clearly is leaning in that direction. Nevertheless, at that point, it already becomes only an Issa D'Rabbanan. And since it's only an Issa D'Rabbanan, so then you can be Meko in the case of a Safek. So Safek Yimeshishim Keneged Agid, then you can be Meko. Kiyim Shatam Agid Ain't a Morgash B'Shum Tzura. There's no way to taste this gid. It doesn't give any taste. But Rashba stapik shema maspik rave keneged gid. Since the Rashba is leaning towards this idea, it should be bottle berev. Okay, so this is bachal. This is only a din midrabban. So this is a midrabban. If it's a suffix with nishbach, like we had earlier, that it was the whole thing spilled out, and you can't measure whether they're shishim or not. So it's not just a suffix yediyah. You don't know how big the gid anashim was. That it's a emes a suffix. So in such a case, the Taz says you could be Meko. Now let's see it inside. So here is Sif base. So if you have a beria and it was cooked together with heter, here we see this whole leg inside a pot. The pot is heter, but the leg is also heter. The only thing that's prohibited about it is the gid anashe inside. If you cannot find it, you don't recognize it, so it's still there. Hakalasa. If you can't tell where it is to take it out, so then the whole thing's going to be usher. We're going to see in the next two sifim. It's more common in our case when it comes to insects. Insect fell inside, now you can't find it. Or you put inside some sort of vegetable that you were supposed to check, and it wasn't checked. So now what do you do? So let's talk about go back to the Gid Anashe base. So if it was cooked for the heter, im eina makire hakal aser, that all the food over there is aser because it's a barrier and a filabella flay bottle. So you can't eat any of the food in the pot. Vareitev. What's with the reitev? The reitev b'neisen tam, you look and see whether it has any taste in it. And again, the taste we're talking over here is basically the shumen. V'makira zorke. So if you see where the gid is, you throw it away. So the rest of the pot, and including the soup, you need shishim against it. You don't need shishim against the gid itself, because its taste, like we say, it doesn't have any taste. There ain't begidim b'neisen tam. We paskin that the gid anashe does not have any tam. But the shemen, the shumen, the fat which is surrounding the gid, so that yes, it's sorach shishim connected lahater. You need shishim against the shumen in order to be able to drink the broth. How are you going to drink the broth? So either you take out all the pieces and you're left with the broth, or you strain it out, whatever the case is. Let's say it's big pieces. Let's say you have a whole bunch of the pieces over there. You don't know which is the gid anashe, which is not. So take anything that looks like the gid anashe, and you can eat the rest. You can eat the reitev as long as you have shishim against the shumah. Lefichach, and therefore, yerech shenisbashel im gidei. If you cooked the thigh itself together with the gidei nasha inside, which is the case in the picture. Imakire, if you can recognize which is the one with the gidei nasha inside, zorke, throw it away. We'll call ashar mut, and everything else is okay. If you have shishim against the shuman of the gidei nasha, so then what's the problem? The gidei nasha is not there anymore because you took it out. So you don't have the problem of a berry anymore. Are you worried about the taste of the gidei nasha? It got cooked inside. Are you worried about the shuman, the fat surrounding the gids? And you have shishim. So no problem. Eat the rest of the parkas on tahit. However, v'meina makire. If you can't tell which one it is, all of the pieces are asur. Yeah, but if you have 60 times more than the fat, then the soup's going to be okay. If you don't have shishim of the soup against the shuman agid, so then it's going to be asur because that is nice and tam. And if you don't have shishim, then it's prohibited. Okay, all of this is the last case is speaking about when you took out the gidei nasha. But let's say the gidei nasha is not anymore because it dissolved into the soup. If the gid dissolved and you can no longer tell where it is, so the machaber paskins you need shishim, and this is the Tazi mentioned before. Okay, so that we all explained outside. Now we have another problem, and this is actually good chazara for basar b'cholav. We had before also when chazar over the din of chetich nasan avel. Anybody see a problem with chetich nasan avel over here? Hello, anybody see a problem?
The rest of the yerach is davuk to the shuman.
Very good, excellent. You remember back over there in Tzadik Base that the Mechaber said Chetich Nasan Avela Chanan is only by basar b'cholav. Shari Surim is no Chetich Nasan Avela. So according to Mechaber, nothing what to talk about. According to the Ramah holds this Chetich Nasan Avela b'Shari Surim, and especially if it's Ifser Dabuk. If the Isser is attached to the heter, so then for sure we have Chetich Nasan Avela b'Shari Surim. If it's Yovish, if it's not, if it's Lach Balach, then there's a whole discussion. Have some Ruba. Okay, but if it's a Isser Davuk, we have Chetich Nasan Avela. So now what's happening over here? The Yarech Nispashal Im Gidei, it's talking about. So you cooked the leg of the animal with the gidei nasha still inside. Okay, so it got cooked inside. So now what happened over here? The gidei nasha is asur. It's davuk to the rest of the piece. Not only the gidei nasha, the shuman is asur. The gid itself is not going to give tam into the rest of the yorech. Let's talk about the shuman. So the shuman which is inside is going to be nice and tam. So we said as long as you have shishim against the shuman, it's okay. Where do you need shishim? What do the Mechaber say? Start with the fourth line. Lefichach yerech shenisbashel im gidei im makire zorke v'kol shamotim. Yesh shishim neged shamne. V'im eina makire chol chedichos. V'yesh pagedera shishim keneged a shuman motor areite v'im lavasa. So if you have shishim in what against the shuman? In the whole pot against the shuman. Come along the shach and taz. So what's going on over here? Why is the Ramah not say anything? The Mechaber, he doesn't hold that there's Chetich Nasan Avela b'Shari Surim. He only holds Chetich Nasan Avela basar b'cholav. So we don't have any question why the Mechaber is not worried about it. He does not hold that the rest of that leg becomes Nasan Avela. But why does the Ramah not say anything over here? What should the Ramah say? You need shishim against the shuman in what? In the whole pot or in the leg of the animal?
In the leg.
In the leg, exactly. You need it in the leg. So the Ladas Ramah, Shemeser Dovak, Chatichas Heter. Sorach Shishim connected call Chatichas Heter. So that's the shaila. What's going on over here? Why does the Ramah not say anything? It's Isser Dabuk. So you would need 60 times more meat in that thigh that the shuman is attached to in order to be mevatel it. And if you don't, what should happen? That whole yarech is going to become aser, and then you need 60 times more soup than what? Than the yarech. You need 60 times more. So, but the Ramah doesn't say anything. So why does the Ramah not say anything? So the Taz, Tzarech lahamid sheshishim keneged agid. You need shishim neged agid, which is bemis. You know, it's the gid is not so big, so you have shishim neged. Or shagid hoy nifred me yarech atzmi. Or maybe the gid is already separate. Like I said, the whole idea you shouldn't be able to be makir is very difficult to explain. You should be able to look at it. Maybe the whole thing got cut up to smaller pieces, and you can't tell anymore what belongs to what. So it's not an entire yarech, then you can't tell. But in any case, the lashon of Machaber doesn't really look. It says yarech shenisbashalim gidei sounds like the gid is still inside the yarech. But what this Pirush is saying is that you put in the yarech, and then you put in the gid. In other words, the person took out the gid anosha, and he took out the shuman, which is also attached to the gid anosha. Okay, he did the nikur on it, and then he threw it back into the pot with the yarech. So the yarech shenisbashalim gidei, both of them are cooked together in the same pot. So then it's not an isser davuk, and we don't have this whole issue of nasa nevela measuring against the yarech. That's what the Taz says. Shach. So that's the whole problem. Is he all turned red to be nasa nevela. The emes is the if you look in Darkei Mesha, the Darkei Mesha on the tour puts in a vart over here, which is really also the Shach mentions it. I'm not mistaken. The Shach Lataz, I think it's the Shach. But the Darkei Mesha, he doesn't mention Darkei Mesha. He just mentions the Svara. He says the Ramah doesn't have to say, don't forget about Chetich Nas Nevela. How many times do you have to keep reminding you already the Ramah? He told you already Chetich Nas Nevela. The Shaila is other places he does remind you, so he doesn't have to remind you every single time. So that's Svara, but Emes, if you look at the Darkei Mesha, I didn't see anybody bring down the Darkei Mesha. I'm sure I didn't really go searching very hard to find it. But the Darkei Mesha says over here that of course you have to make sure there's no nas nevela. Yeah, v'im nimlach im yarech, he speaks about if it was salted together. Look above and sin mitzadik beis yamrin chetich nas nevela. Yes, he doesn't assume that somebody would cook a whole yarech with the gid inside, and therefore he's maybe that's why the Ramah didn't say it. The Ramah over there in Darkei Mesha, there's only talking case it was nimlach, that the person you're supposed to do the nikur before the malicha, but a person if they did the malicha before the nikur, so we have to know whether it aser b'diavad, and we go back to the iser of a iser davuk, and then chetich nas nevela, and what's the din of malicha, and you go back over there, has the whole discussion back over there in Hilchos malicha. In any case, the Ramah doesn't say anything, but if this case would happen, then we say that according to the Taz, at least you wouldn't need to worry about Chetich Nas Nevela. But Samach Tzedek and Piskei Dinim throws out another svara here. Yesh Seivim Sheshum Gidarash En Israel Minig Shenagi Yisrael Kadeshim. We're treating it over here like a regular Issa D'Rabbanan. You see clearly that the Machav is treating it that way. But there are those that hold that it's not really an Issa. V'loch En Elach Meshashum and Zayeser Kol Chetich Matam Issa Dovak. Machar B'chal doesn't hold it Chetich Nas Nevela. Okay, so we don't pass him like that, but it's another sniff. And over here, who says this shuman b'chal is also? Why should the shuman be also? The minig can be Yisrael Kadeshim. So you're not going to answer something based on the minig Yisrael Kadeshim. Yeah, I'm over there in Piskei Dinim. But for us, it's going to be more relevant. We don't cook a gidanasha even on purpose. You couldn't cook a gidanasha. Who's going to get a hold of gidanasha? Okay, but this whole din about tam is very negay when it comes to insects. Siv Gimel. Kedei Rishal Marak. You have a pot of soup. Shenafel Sham Beria. Benevda, fell inside a bug, and now it's lost. So what's the din? Asar hakol. A whole pot becomes asar. If you can't find it, obviously. Now you have a little insect, so if it's very cooperative and it floats to the top, then it's good. If it was big, it wasn't the barrier like a little insect. It was a chvesa, a trefa bird. So nothing good, and you can find it. It's not going to be hard to find. But if you have a barrier and it got lost and you can't get it out, so then you have a major problem. Now, is there any eitzah? So eitzah number one. The tam, remember, is bottle. It's only the barrier itself is not bottle. So we can't find the barrier. Is there anything we can do? So eitzah number one. Let's take, for example, it was clear chicken soup. You have some chicken soup, and there's chicken and some carrots there. Let's to make it a simple recipe. There was a piece of chicken, and there was a carrot and a potato. The Bachar made Shabbos. The Bachar today will make it mamish gourmet. But anyway, they made it with a very simple recipe. They didn't plan it, but it ended up that a bug fell inside. And now they can't find it, the bury the bottle. So what are you going to do? So first, eitzah im efshul asanenes amarok. So if it's possible to filter out the soup, pour it through a sieve, but bury a gedela, and the berry is big enough, and it's big enough that it's not going to go through the holes of the sieve, so then you can drink the soup. Put it through, and if you saw the bug fall in, you know how big it is, you put it through a fine enough mesh that you're going to filter it out, and then you can have the soup. It got cooked inside. Okay, but if it's batel b'shishim, then you don't have to worry about the taste. You have to worry about the mamashas. Okay, but feel a mikra sheyafshul is called a mark. And even if you can't filter out all the soup, let's say it's a thick vegetable soup, and there's pieces all in it. There's nothing clear in it. How are you going to put the thing for the filter? Nothing's going to come out of the filter. It's a thick soup. If you have a part of that soup that you can check and make sure that it doesn't have the bug, then you can eat that. So an example, I gave it a chicken soup. Let's say it was too thick to put through a sieve, or you don't have a sieve. What could you do? Take out the carrot. Okay, look at the carrot. Rinse off the carrot if you want. Rinse off the carrot, check the carrot. You can check the carrot to see if it has bugs on it. That's easy enough to find. The carrot's sitting over there. If you want, even the carrot was cut into pieces. You can do every single little piece of carrot. Maybe it's not so practical. Let's say it's a whole carrot that was peeled and thrown inside. So it's smooth. Take it, rinse it off, look at it. There's no bug, and you can eat the carrot. And then this is all the other things you can do with that too. The shayla is, can you do that with the meat? So theoretically, the poskim speak about doing that to the piece of meat, rinsing it off. But if you remember, way back when we spoke about, the Alter Rebbe brings down about meat, the assumption that it has crevices inside. Remember, we had the whole discussion over there. It was mutuv tavl, and if the meat had bikuim, it had crevices inside, and Alter Rebbe assumes that all meat has some crevices inside. So it's very difficult to clean it out if you have a little tiny bug over there to make sure that it didn't fall in one of the crevices. But if it's a smooth piece of meat, then you can do that. You can rinse off the piece of meat, rinse off the chicken, and you can eat that too. You just have to make sure that there's no mamashas there anymore, that you're going to fall into the category of a barrier. Now, are you allowed to blend it? So then we run into the whole issue of mavatal isel lechatchila. A question: what does nevda mean? That it was cooked, but the mamashas from invisible was completely dissolved. If you know completely dissolved, so then we already have the din before of the gid that dissolved. So if it dissolved and it was less than shishim, the whole thing's mutter. The shayla is, how do you know whether it dissolved or not? So the emes is, we have a more common case is in Hilchos Teiloim, and it's closely related to the din over here. But Hilchos Teiloim is constantly referring back and forth to these dinim here. Over here, there was a Vadei Isser. Here, you saw the bug fall in. Well, we know somehow, Hilchos Taruvos, and we're speaking about an Isser. Okay, so there was a bug and it fell inside. Now we can't find it. Back over there in Hilchos Taruvos, it brings a whole discussion from the Rashba about what happens if there was a food that normally has teiloim in it, and you threw it into the soup without checking it. So that's not the same case as this. That's the case. So we have different gedorim over there in Hilchos Teiloim. If you have such a thing which is more than 50%, it's muchzik b'teiloim, then it's a chiyuv d'oraisa to check it. If it's if it's less than 50%, so then we have only a chiyuv to check it midrabanan, unless it's a miyut, and if it's a miyut, that's a miyut on motzi. If it's a miyut shein a motzoi, if it's not only miyut but very unusual, so then you don't need to check it at all. So all discussion in the poskim of the dinim over there. What happens if it's muchzik? If it's more than 50%, if it's less than 50%, what's the gather of miyut shein a motzi? In any case, you don't know for sure, even in those cases. So we can say ruba kikule, but over here we're not talking about. It's not a factor. Over here we know that it fell inside. So although we might use the fact that it was in a pot, maybe it fell apart in the pot. There are certain types of isurim that Tzemach Tzedek talks about in Piskei Dinim also, that the nature of these foods is the longer you cook them, the more they fall apart. So if you had such a barrier, I can't think offhand of something that meets the criteria, but if you had something like that, so then that also would change the din. Over there, that the whole Rashba is thinking about it's a suffix. If you can putting together sveikis, can we be mitzvah if the suffix that since it was cooked, maybe it fell apart in the cooking, maybe a leg fell off, something like this. There's no longer shalom. We don't have the din of a barrier. Okay, but that's again, that's more for Hilchos Teiloim. I'm mentioning it over here because the two areas are closely related.
Does it have to be whole when you find it, or whole when it fell in?
If you find it, then if you find it, if you find it, you take it out. So what's the problem?
No, what if you can't find it now?
Or if you only find half of it.
Like the old joke, what's worse than finding a worm in your apple, finding a half worm in your apple? Yeah.
Well, in this case, it would be better to be worse to find a whole worm.
Why is it worse to find a whole worm? You found the whole worm.
Because it's a full barrier.
It's a full barrier, but you took it out, so life is good. You took it out, you threw it in the garbage. As long as you have shishim, so the soup is okay.
Let's say I put a fresh parsley in my soup, and I find a piece of parsley and there's a bug on it. What's with the rest of the soup?
Okay, that goes back to the Rashba. Actually, because it's going to go on to Sif Dalid. Okay, but if you didn't check it, then it's a suffix. Okay, if you have something that parsley needs to be checked. If you put it in the parsley without checking it, so then you have to go back and learn Hilchah. We can't learn Sim Pei Dalid now. It's a whole lengthy sif and Shulchan Aruch what happened in such a case. So now it's saying ganz nicht poshut. Okay, but that's not the case over here. Here you saw one leaf of parsley with one bug fall inside, and you can't find the parsley. Then later on, the Eibush Gulf, and you found the parsley. You put it through a strainer, you found the parsley, and Heidel Hashem Kitev, that the one bug, how this whole thing happened is a little beyond the imagination, stretches the imagination. That you saw one piece of parsley that had one bug on it. How do you know it was not two pieces of parsley? How do you know the one piece of parsley didn't have two bugs? And if you were able to get such a good look on it, how did it end up in the soup in the first place? You had such a good inspection to tell there's only one bug on the piece of parsley. So like how exactly this happened is another discussion. We're not just talking about bugs over here. We're talking about anything. Any berry that fell in. You know, an eagle fell inside, you know about Eif Tommy. So all the other cases over there. Certainly a Gidon Osher fell inside, right? Anyway, so this is talking about a case, you know the bug fell inside. A fly fell inside. Can't find it. Okay, if you're talking about a case of Suffolk, it's a very, very good question, and it's very practical. And frankly, if it was up to me, I would have maybe trade in Hilchos Teiloim for some of the other things they learn for Smicha, but that's not my. We're not talking about that now. Very important din. Should learn them. But now Siv Dalet. This is related. Here's your parsley, showed up on the left over here. Parsley, whatever it is. But it's some leafy vegetable that has some bug on it. So now we have a related din. Yerakas muvusholis. You have cooked vegetables. And yerakes, and those who want to say that yerakes is a yorik, is talking about greens, like leafy vegetables. Like that. We say yerakes, we talk about pri adama also. The pri adama is really a peri. Yerakes is more, okay, but you could find the teilaim in either of them. Here we have a nice picture of some worms floating over there in the soup. Got 3 worms floating in the soup. Mamish juicy worms over here. Shame. Yerakas muvusholes. Shnimtzu behem gimel teilaim. So you cook some vegetables, and then you look at the vegetables. Vehine. These were vegetables that normally do not have bugs in them. But it happens. Just went out an alert from the VAT that snow peas have bugs in them. Snow peas. Where do the snow peas have bugs on them? I imagine they're very small. I have never seen bugs on snow peas. But it has an alert. They're finding insects on the snow peas like pea pods. The snow peas are like the Chinese food, they have them. It's like a pea pod, but you don't break them open to eat the peas inside and throw away the shell. You eat the whole thing. So that's something which normally you don't need to check for a teilaim. It's something which is a mere chain of motzi, and it's not something which is commonly found. But now they're finding it, and it happens every once in a while, something like this. There was once an alert years went ago that the red peppers, the green peppers, had insects in it, and the part of the bottom of the pepper, you have this hollow area on the bottom was mamish molly, full of bugs. And it happened for about 2 weeks. They were getting peppers from someplace, I don't know, and they had an insect problem. And then the 2 weeks went by and never to be seen again. I mean, these things happen from time to time. You find unusual instances, occurrences. You have bugs that don't represent the majority of cases. So a person didn't know about this alert, and they cooked up the pot full of snow peas. Okay, and they find a bug inside. What's the din? Take out the bug, you can eat the rest. Then they find a second bug. So this is not looking so good. He's got a friend. No, maybe it was a chavrusi. It's still mutter. You find a third bug, so then hayirakas asuri. The whole pot is asur. That establishes a chazaka, just like we see other places in halacha, that 3 times makes a chazaka. So to over here, 3 teiloim in the pot, in this group of vegetables, means that it is muchzak b'teiloim. We assume that there's more bugs there and you just didn't find them, and therefore they will become mustard. Again, if it's such a thing that you could rinse and you can check them all, so like any other insect, now people say, oh, you're not allowed to this, you're not allowed to eat that. You're allowed to eat everything as long as you check it. Okay, but you have to check it. If the thing has to, if we were not allowed to eat anything that had teilaim in it, people would, especially years ago, people mamish starve. That's not the din. The din is that something which is mechuyev b'dika, you have to check, and you have to get rid of it. Not everything is so easy to check. It might take time to check, and everybody's in a big rush because they have to read their WhatsApps. They're very busy. Whatever the case is. No, people are talking busy. I'm not the Machen Shulun Tzanis, the Neshei Yisrael, Neshei B'nai Yisrael. It's we're also accustomed today to not have to. The pace of life is faster. The more responsibilities, whatever the case is. But they used to spend a lot of the time, a lot of the day cooking and preparing the food, and that was something. I was going to mention it before. I didn't get a chance. I didn't really see where it fit in. But I think this is the place where it fits in. So this is, take it off share for a second. So this is like the classic sefer on Hilchos Teilaim. It's a 3-volume sefer from Moshe Vai. There's a 1-volume summary of it in English, but he addresses the question, Ha'ela Makshim, that many people ask the question, like, why are there suddenly all of these problems over there? People in the past, why did we never hear about Tehillim before? So just very interesting. So, again, I don't know if you can read this over here, but he has a parak here. You see parak Gimel, Metzias Yameinu L'umas Ha'avar. And he has 11 items about things have changed in today's world the way it was in the past to answer that question about what is the change of things in the past as compared to the present. Many things. It's interesting to take one example, but if you cross the border, some in Canada, you cross the border, they have big signs over there, fruits and vegetables you can't bring in. Why can't you bring fruits and vegetables? It's a problem. The problem is Tehillim. What's the problem with Tehillim? That became frumakas, and they're worried about Sim Pedal. They don't want it to import an insect that's going to destroy the crops. Because if you have something that doesn't have a natural enemy, then the thing could spread like wildfire. Okay, it used to be there's a bug called a leaf miner. It goes inside the leaf. Okay, and there used to be Eretz Yisrael didn't have them, but some chacham decided to sneak in, I don't know, a piece of celery, whatever he did, and he was mavriach as a meches, and he snuck in over there, and now the whole Eretz Yisrael is full of leaf miner. Okay, this just one example he brings in the Sefer over here. There's a Colorado beetle. Okay, Colorado beetle. Shame. So where does it come from? It comes from Colorado. How did it get to Europe? So it didn't swim there. Somebody had it in the luggage, and you probably can't read this, but over here you have the first time it was detected was 1921 in this part of France here. This is 1921. And you see over here, they write down year by year by year, because every place they check for these insects, and the Colorado beetle, by the time it hit 1979, I guess they walked slow, 1979, it made it to Vladivostok. From 1921, what did I say, 21? Yeah, 1921 to 1979, made it to Vladivostok. But look over here in England. There's no Colorado beetle in England. They never swam across the channel. Nobody snuck one in, or they had natural enemies there, whatever the case was. So you have all of these things. Just mention one other thing. The strawberries is a famous thing I might have mentioned to you before. What mitamol strawberries? People always ate strawberries. Everybody's eating strawberries. What happened to strawberries? So what happened to strawberries is that like a person takes too much antibiotic, the body gets a resistance to antibiotics, that it kills everything except the bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. So what happens when a person takes too many antibiotics, and then they get one of these superbugs, and they have a bacteria, and they can't find any antibiotic for it anymore, because the only thing that survived this blast of antibiotics is this gibar of a bacteria that you can't kill it with anything. So this is exactly what happened to strawberries. The strawberries, sodium bromate, I think it was, the pesticide that they used, made beautiful strawberries, bug-free. Everything was fantastic, and they were doing it not for the Yidden. They shouldn't worry about Tehillim, that there's a certain amount of insect damage, and the farmers lose money as a result of the crop damage. They want to get rid of it, so they put these powerful insecticides, and then it kills all the bugs. The problem is some of them kill the people too, so they take those off the market, and they find another one. So now they kill the person, they're not killing the people anymore, but they're killing the ozone layer. So it's eichet kaharget a mensch. Okay, AIDS Adam who are more worried about the ozone layer than they are the people. Euthanasia, abortion, yeah, but the ozone layer is have to protect those. Okay, shame. Whatever the case is, so they prohibited this insecticide. So again, so now they can only find these insecticides that are not so effective, and the only insects that are left are the gibedim shall be gibedim, survived decades of sodium bromate. So therefore, they're spreading like wildfire. So it made the problem much, much worse than it was. Yeah, there's a couple of bugs, clean them, and everything was taken care of. So the problem became much worse. Anyway, those are 2 out of the 11 factors. Just thought I would mention that. We're not learning Hilchos Tehillim, but thought I mentioned that. So let's go back now to Sif Dal. This is the last Sif in the Sif. So we have 3 insects that you found inside. So the rest of the vegetables are asr. However, the water from the vegetables, let's say a person made vegetable soup, so they cooked vegetables there, and so you can take out the vegetables, you can strain them out, put it through a strainer that's fine enough that the insect is not going to go through, so then you can eat the rest. So to the meat, wash it, inspect it, and it's okay. And obviously you have to do it in such a way you can get inside. I'm not sure the Alter Rebbe would agree with this. It seems the Alter Rebbe is worried about bukoyim on all different types of meat. But in any case, if you're sure that it's insect-free, let's say it was 3 flies inside. The flies are big. We don't have to be chesed. You have mites. You have mites. So this is a whole discussion. He brings it over here also, the Neisa Kalim, bring the subject of milbin. So milbin, this is actually a crazy place is writing about milbin, because milbin is so tiny. When you have in flour, if there's milbin in flour, there's always eggs. There's always insect eggs in flowers. Flowers, you leave it long enough, it will become buggy. No shaila about it. It will always happen. And you're allowed to use the flour because the eggs are microscopic, but the eggs turn into insects eventually if you leave them long enough. That's why you keep it in the freezer. They won't turn into insects. All different eights is what to do with a flour. But once the milbin finally develop, so they're visible. You can see it walking around on the table. You put it on a black plate and you can see them walking around. The only problem is if they're not walking around, you can't see them. So that's one of the things crazy place. He doesn't write this prat, but he writes it's almost impossible. How do you avoid milbin? What happens when these milbin die? The only way you can detect them is because they're moving. Once they're dead, they're not moving anymore. So how are you going to tell the difference between this and the flower? They're mamish tiny. They're visible to the naked eye. Flour is also visible to the naked eye, but each particle of flour is very small. It's very small, but you say in Hebrew charakim. Charakim is from chirik. You have a chirik in a small siddur. How big is that dot? It's very small, but that doesn't mean it's invisible. It's not invisible. So in any case, when you filter it, it has to be something which is finer than what you're putting it through. There was once a case, a person wrote into the Rebbe that they were having difficulties. They were told to be medayik b'kashus. They were pretty careful in kashus, but okay, they'll be more careful. So they cut down a few achsheinim there in Yisrael. So the problem persisted. They asked the Rebbe said, be medayik b'kashus. So they kept asking, the Rebbe kept answering. They didn't know what to do anymore. So they went to a Rav. The Rav went through the kitchen, Rav came down to the house, and it turned out the zip, for the flour, for sifting the flour, was the wrong mesh. It was too wide. The holes were too. I think they didn't have children, but I'm not mistaken. The mesh was too wide. So there's a certain quality mesh that has to be smaller than a certain measurement. Otherwise, the insects will go straight through the sifter. So anyway, they changed that, and the problem was solved. So yeah, Masananen is according to, if it was flies that fell inside, then it's no big deal. You can take something to sift spaghetti. Mastam would catch the flies. I don't know, but it has to be smaller than whatever it was that fell in. Because anything that you're able to check after it was cooked, I brought the example before, the carrot or something like that, so then you can allow it to just rinse it off later on and it's okay. But this is another discussion. Let's say it wasn't that the vegetables had insects. The vegetables came from somewhere else. You're sitting in the sukkah, and something fell into the three bugs fell off the schach and fell into the pot. You have to answer the whole pot. So there's an opinion that says that you don't have to consider it, you don't have to answer it. It doesn't come under the category of this din, because it's this din is not talking about it. It's a whole discussion. It's in Chaim and Yehuda, Magen Avraham. It's discussed in many places over there. Anyway, it's a shaila. It's not a clear heter, and depends on the circumstances. Because on the one hand, so it had nothing to do with the vegetables; it came from the sach. On the other hand, if you're still sitting in the sukkah, so then who says more of them are not going to fall in? Okay, you could put a cover on to prevent them falling. Who said they didn't fall in already? You only found 3 of them. At the same way the 3 got in, maybe another 3 are sitting there on the bottom. Maybe another one of theirs on the bottom. Better than a bottle. If you label for the bottle, you still have a problem. So mention over here the Inyan of Chazaka. So the Nesa Kalim said, what's the magic number? 3? 3 is because it makes a Chazaka. But you look in the Gemara, it's a Machlekes Tanoim. How many times do you need to establish a Chazaka? Rebbe says that even 2 times makes a Chazaka. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that 3 times makes a Chazaka. In certain cases, we are Cheshesh to the opinion of Rebbe. Let's say you have a child that died Machmas Mila, made a bris Mila on the child. So it used to be they didn't have refuahs for hemophiliacs and things like this. The child started bleeding, and Rahmal Islan bled to death. So what's with the second child? You're not going to do a bris Mila. Not every child has that. But let's say you mal a second boy from that family, and the same thing happens. So then already we say it's a chazaka. We have a machma like Rebbe. That the chazaka, you don't need 3 times for a chazaka, 2 times enough to make a chazaka, and you're not mal. I mean, today we have tests and we can do different things, but those days there was no way to find out and no way to correct it, nothing to do about it. So for machma like Rebbe said, a bach, the Bach, they quote the Bach. The Bach says that, so 2 over here, even if it's 2, the Machaber says if it's 3, but it should be machma like Rebbe. But Maskana la Halacha is that here 2. It goes by 3, it doesn't go by 2. And yeah, so that's it for today. Any questions? Stopping the recording.